It is indeed BFM 89.9, the business station. My name is Rich Bradbury and welcome to Enterprise Explores. This is the show where we explore everything from the headlines to the bottom line. Now, Malaysia's economic fundamentals have been strengthening. The ringgit is holding steady, inflation is cooling, and business sentiment is gradually improving. And on paper, things look rather stable. But on the ground, SMEs are telling a very different story. Hiring has never been harder. Wage expectations continue to rise. Workers are demanding flexibility. And younger employees are increasingly pushing back against low pay, rigid structures, unclear progression, and burnout-inducing cultures. This tension between macroeconomic optimism and micro-level labor friction is shaping a new workplace reality. And today, we're going to be exploring what's driving this shift, why employees feel more empowered, and what Malaysian SMEs need to rethink if they want to attract and retain talent in 2025 and beyond that. And joining me to discuss this, and somebody who watches Malaysia's labour market quite closely, is Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, the CEO of the Centre for Market Education. Dr. Carmelo, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I know you're overseas elsewhere in Jakarta right now, so thank you very much for taking the time. Now,
it's my pleasure.
As I mentioned there in the setup, Carmelo, when we look at that macro picture, Malaysia seems to be stabilizing. So why then are SMEs still struggling so significantly with hiring and retention?
Well, I think that if we look in perspective, the phenomenon that we are observing now is probably the result of the success of Malaysia. So it's not a contradiction with that success, but a consequence of that success. And I explain myself. So the Malaysian economy is largely made of SMEs. So we're talking about 96-97% of the total number of firms in Malaysia, although their contribution to GDP is limited, is below 40%. But and they hire more or less half of the working population. Now, the Malaysian economic miracle or economic success over the past decades has been built on the success of SMEs.
Right.
This success has given chance to the second and third generations of these small entrepreneurs, of the owners of these small enterprises, to go to school, go to university, and get a title, with the ambition to be in a different place from the place of their parents often.
Got it.
So, of course, mass education or mass graduation creates mass expectations as well. Okay?
Yeah.
So people expect to get certain type of jobs, managerial jobs, leadership jobs, but this obviously is in conflict with the fact that despite the success of the Malaysian model, the model remains itself anchored to small and medium enterprises.
Got it.
So it evolved in terms of quantity, but it didn't evolve in terms of structure of capitalism, if you want.
Yeah.
It's still very much made of small companies. And obviously the opportunities for social mobility, leadership, and a certain type of jobs that SMEs can offer are by nature limited. And there is the friction. So which is, again, I repeat, not a contradiction with the success, but a consequence of that success.
That is interesting. Do you think then because of that we're witnessing this true shift then potentially in bargaining power from employer to employee?
That is again, I mean, labor market is a market, and as each market is made of supply and demand. And if you look at the numbers, basically, in Malaysia there is no unemployment. I mean, 3% unemployment. So basically we are at the level of structural unemployment. This means that, employees or future employees have a higher bargaining power because they are in demand. Where the problem is that the kind of people or the kind of skills or the kind of functions that are in demand are not necessarily corresponding to the kind of job opportunities that fresh graduates are looking for.
Yeah. So what then do you think, what role does demographic change then, particularly with Gen Z, play in reshaping these labor expectations?
So there is a generational impact, obviously, and this is due to cultural shifts, but also to the fact that the way in which the new generation of workers has been raised, has grown up, is completely different. The conditions, the economic conditions, are completely different from the way in which they were brought up, the people that created the SMEs or the past generation of entrepreneurs. But then obviously we have to put again supply and demand conditions which show not unemployment but sort of underemployment or mismatch between expectations, and somehow the impact of this shift to work from home that we had during the pandemic that has created something into the mentality of the people which is not always compatible and consistent with the actual work that you have to do in a company, in particular when you are young. You know, this is my personal belief also as an employer, that when you are at the beginning of your career, I believe working from home is not very healthy.
Right.
You need to learn how to deal with other human beings, how to interact, also how to deal with the stress of dealing with other human beings, with conflicting expectations, with politics in a office environment or in a working environment, and somehow working from home can be a way to escape it, and that is not healthy, because it's good to have that type of education, the type of impact when you are at the beginning of your career, rather than paying the price later on.
Okay, well, let's just explore that then a little bit then. Do you think then that a lot of Malaysian SMEs are underestimating just how much worker psychology has changed since the pandemic?
Probably they are aware, or there is a mixed kind of awareness, but they are not in the position for remaining in the market to totally adequate themselves to that shift, because the way of working that maybe the new generations wants is not consistent with the needs of the firm.
Okay, on that note, let's take a short break. Folks, we are talking about when staff push back, what SMEs need to understand about the new employee power shift. I'm speaking with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito. He is the CEO of the Centre for Market Education. We'll be right back after these messages here on Enterprise Explores on BFM 89.9, the business station. BFM 89.9, the business station. Welcome back to Enterprise Explores. I am Rich Bradbury. Now, we said that Malaysia's economic fundamentals have been strengthening. The ringgit is holding steady, inflation is cooling, and business sentiment is gradually improving. And on paper, things look stable. But on the ground, SMEs are telling a very different story. Hiring has never been harder. Wage expectations continue to rise, and workers are demanding flexibility, and younger employees are increasingly pushing back against low pay, rigid structures, even unclear progression, and burnout inducing cultures. I'm speaking with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito. He is the CEO of the Centre for Market Education. Carmelo, now we're hearing these stories of workers who have started walking away from low pay or rigid hours. What then does this tell us about how the workforce now views quote unquote acceptable work today?
As I mentioned earlier, the fact that there is, if you want, more demand for work than there is supply of workers is creating conditions for new workers to look for different kind of opportunities. And ultimately, it goes back to economic. You know, when you choose a career to economics, when you choose your career path, you look at a balance between different type of satisfactions. There are the monetary satisfactions that are clearly measurable in ringgit and cents. And then there are the non-monetary satisfactions. So, and of course, every person has different preferences in this regard. But in the current conditions, probably people tend to give higher value to a certain degree of freedom or to a certain degree of flexibility.
Right.
In particular, if they see that the monetary reward that can come from a structured job is ultimately not that different from the monetary reward that can come from an unstructured job.
Right. So when we look at that, then, what do you think is the extent of wage dissatisfaction that drives that pushback? Or is it, as you say, more about things like progression, recognition, culture?
I think it's a mix of both. So on one side, of course, we have people that have grown also somehow in comfortable environments, so they tend to give less weight to the monetary income and more to the freedom and to the flexibility. On the other side, and I think this is an important structural change, which in certain countries in Europe already happened, getting a title, getting a graduation, and moving into a structured career is not anymore equivalent to opportunities for social mobility, so for progression. Yeah. So someone can say, I go that way and I remain there with the very structured job. I go the other way, still I don't grow, I get the same money, but I have the flexibility. So the level of flexibility start to weigh in a very different way, because there are no perceived opportunities in the other sector. And this, to go back to your initial question, is very much related to the predominance of SMEs that by ontology, I would say, cannot grant too much career progression.
Yeah. Now, we often hear this phrase, and I'm sure you will have heard it repeated, that young people just don't want to work. Is that reality, or I don't think I've seen that, and I don't believe necessarily that is the case. Do you think there's nuance to that phrase, though?
No, I tend to agree with you, and in my experience as an employer, I must say that I have encountered young people, hardworking people, that really they want to go the extra mile. Yeah. However, I believe that the environment that surrounds them counts very much. And my approach is to tend to leave people free to find their own path within an organization. Also, when I work as consultant for other businesses taking care of HR, to try to allow people to blossom, themselves. So to follow them from far away, so from a distance, so to leave a space for growth, which is not necessarily monetary growth, but also personal growth in terms of ability of self-expression. And again, SMEs often tend to be more controlling, tend to have a tendency to micromanagement, and this is where probably you can have the pushback from the work. You don't feel that space for personal growth.
What do you think then, just before we take a break, are some of the biggest misconceptions that some of these SMEs might have about today's current talent market?
I think, that maybe they are stuck a bit in a traditional mentality where they want also an employer to be attached to an employee attached to the company for long, start from the very beginning, which I think is not wrong per se. But rather than a cultural issue here, I see mainly the issue of the will to move away from being an SME. So the will to find a way to consolidate with other businesses, because that ultimately, and this is something I have discussed also with Roshan in other occasions, that ultimately is the necessary precondition for allowing social mobility, economies of scale. Without that, I think we have no way out from the current situation.
Okay. Hold that thought. We need to take a short break. Folks, I'm speaking with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito. He is joining me. Of course, he's somebody who follows Malaysia's labour market quite closely as the CEO of the Centre for Market Education. We're talking about how things are difficult on the ground. There is tension between macroeconomic optimism and micro-level labour friction. It's shaping a new workplace reality. We'll be right back after these messages here on Enterprise Explores on BFM 89.9, the business station. BFM 89.9, the business station. Welcome back to Enterprise Explores. I am Rich Bradbury. We are exploring the idea of when staff push back. This idea that what SMEs need to understand about there's a potential new employee power shift happening. And I'm speaking with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito. He is the CEO of the Center for Market Education. I guess then, Carmelo, and you've kind of explained it quite well earlier on about how SMEs really do have very thin margins and often cannot be as wage competitive as other companies, or as other businesses rather. But how do they need to think about that wage competitiveness given those thin margins?
Yes, I think that there is no much space for creativity in the sense that, as I mentioned earlier, the best way to go out of this dilemma is to move away from an economic model which is strongly reliant on SMEs.
Right.
And this is really cultural, yeah? So, because aggregation, so going together between different companies, part of the same value chain, is not only difficult from a structural perspective, but I think that the biggest block is really a mental block. The idea of doing things together, trusting each other, to be more competitive, to go big, to go in different markets, and as an indirect consequence, also to create better occasions for employees, because I cannot blame SMEs for having stagnant wages, because that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And again, the real step is not just on wages, but really is a structural step on the way in which we organize our economy.
Okay, then. So if we can't improve wages necessarily, what are some low-cost changes that they could improve to help it improve retention, especially for these younger workers? I don't know, clearer career paths, more autonomy.
I think is a path that needs to be done in the double direction. So on one side, I think small and medium enterprises need to embrace an approach to the work environment which allows for personal growth, maybe not necessarily monetary growth, but at least skill growth, experience, and give more room for decision processes within the work environment, so more space for the employees. On the other side, I believe that also young employees need to understand that indeed they are young, and they cannot pretend to arrive at a working place expecting to know everything just because they are graduated and maybe the founder of the company is not.
Okay.
So the thing is double way. So we need the two sides to walk toward each other, and understanding also that the work environment is made of human interactions and need to deal with that. We cannot just escape out of that.
Let's talk about that idea then, that idea of flexibility as well. How important is flexibility in this context? And I guess, what does realistic flexibility actually look like?
I believe, and this has always been my approach, that true flexibility can be deployed when targets and expectations are clear.
Right.
If the work relationship is built not on hours, but on targets, on clear, measurable, identifiable targets, then it's more easy to give way to flexibility, because then it can be clearly seen if a certain target has been achieved or not from both parties. Then if that has been achieved in 2 hours or in 8 hours, it doesn't matter, because we all agree that we wanted to achieve a certain target within a certain time frame.
Right.
And that gives flexibility in terms of time, but also flexibility in terms of methods, in directions. And I think that is really the foundation to build. You cannot have flexibility without clear targets, because then becomes only a pretension,
Right.
I want to be free. That doesn't work.
And you've kind of answered my last question then, because what I wanted to ask you was whether or not SMEs need to rethink the way that they look at things like productivity and output and worker value. But clearly, what you're saying indicates that that is perhaps what needs to be looked at.
Yeah, I totally agree on the fact that, I mean, working hours in many cases, not everywhere, not in every case, but in many cases are irrelevant. What matters is what is achieved. And that is where probably the biggest cultural shift need to be made.
Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks to you for having me. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure too. Folks, as Malaysia's economy strengthens, the labour market is sending a clear message that the old employer-centric model is losing relevance. Workers, especially younger ones, want better alignment between pay, between purpose, flexibility and growth. SMEs that recognize this shift and adapt their structures, their leadership styles and workplace culture will find it easier to attract and keep that talent. Those that don't may struggle, regardless of how favorable the macroeconomy looks. My thanks, of course, to Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, the CEO of the Centre for Market Education. This has been Enterprise Explores here on BFM 89.9. Do stick around, of course. Coming up after the 1 o'clock news, it is the Breakfast Grill replay, and we'll be back same time, same place tomorrow at noon here on BFM 89.9, the business station.